It is just before dawn on the morning of March 6th, 1836. Inside the old mission known as the Alamo, 250 Texians get their first good night's sleep in 12 days. They are hungry, thirsty, sick, and exhausted. They are scared of what the morning might bring. In the next hour, these men and women will become history. And not too long after that, they will become lost to time and legend. It will be our task to try and find them again.
I remember going there as a young kid. I actually have a memory of visiting the Alamo at night in the middle of a rainstorm. Like, it was just like seeing it outside in the middle of a rainstorm. That's my first memory of the Alamo.
My first experience with the Alamo, or the first memory I have of it, was going to the Bob Bullock Museum when I was in elementary school, just as a school field trip. You know, whenever you're younger, it's hard to really understand sort of the gravity of the situation and the amount of bravery that it took for these men that fought in the battle.
I believe I was probably watching the John Wayne version of the Alamo. I mean, that's what my parents were a very big John Wayne fan, and so I was watching that with them at a young age. I mean, you have all the stories that, you know, your epic Western of John Wayne and those types of things, and that was kind of my first memory of it.
These 9 teachers work for iUniversity Prep, one of the leading virtual schools in the United States. History teacher, curriculum editor, and project leader Heath Hamrick has been involved for years in running immersive historical simulations for students. This year, these 9 teachers will be trying to bring to life the final hours of the siege of the Alamo. Along the way, they hope students will get a glimpse at what the reality of 1836 might have been like. The sun is set. Colonel William Barrett Travis, the commander of the Alamo garrison, is sending James Allen on a desperate mission to beg once more for reinforcements and aid from their fellow Texians. He almost certainly knows that the mission is destined to fail. But why are Travis and his fellow Texians in this desperate situation? Before we can explore the events of the last day at the Alamo, we need to understand the 12 days that came before, in the words of those who were there.
For enemies, and the news that came from Texas made me realize that they were the most formidable enemies that threatened our country at the time. National decorum demanded that war be waged against those who wished to betray the territory of Texas. A cause more just could not be found.
Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, President of Mexico, the Napoleon of the West, determined to crush the revolt of the Texian settlers against his rule.
In summing up Santa Anna's character, I would have an overly simplistic view of it. Confidence, arrogance, a certainty and an understanding that it was his battle to win. When I put the uniform of General Santa Anna, I definitely felt emboldened and that I owned the room.
I am besieged. The enemy has demanded a surrender at discretion. Otherwise, the garrison are to be put to the sword. I have answered the demand with a cannon shot, and our flag still waves proudly from the walls. I shall never surrender or retreat. Victory or death.
William Barrett Travis. Hot-headed, melodramatic, patriotic. Just 26 years old.
He had the world on his shoulders. All these men he was asking to fight and then to die. I just can't imagine all the weight on those shoulders.
On February 23rd, Santa Anna charged into San Antonio with his troops. Only a few minutes after the bells of the city rang the alarm, Captain Dickinson galloped up to our dwelling and hurriedly exclaimed, "Give me the baby, jump on behind me, and ask me no questions." We hastened over to the Alamo.
Susanna Dickinson, wife of Almiron Dickinson, a blacksmith from Gonzales, eyewitness to the defenders' final hours.
I would think that she was probably, in a way, probably almost resigned to thinking that this was going to be the end. That night had to be a mix of terror, but also, trying to put on a brave face and just waiting it out.
Santa Anna informed the messenger that the garrison could be recognized only as rebels and be allowed no other terms than a surrender at discretion.
Reuben Marmaduke Potter, a soldier, a scholar, a poet, the first historian to write about the fall of the Alamo by talking to those who witnessed it. Today, not much remains of the old mission turned fortress where the Texians made their last stand against Santa Anna's army. The walls of the long barracks and the chapel are the only original structures that remain. But in 1836, the Alamo was a compound of 3 acres and 440 yards of crumbling adobe walls, timber palisades, defensive ditches, dirt ramparts, and 18 cannons protecting the Texian soldiers and some of their families. For 12 days, the men and women inside the Alamo have waited. They have waited for help to arrive from their fellow colonists. They have waited for their meager food and ammunition supplies to run out. They have waited for Santa Anna's soldados to make the final attack they all know is coming. But to understand this, the final hours of the 13 days of the Alamo siege, and to understand why these people are within these walls, we must first ask the questions one doesn't find in the history books. Our focus is the final hours lived by those within the Alamo and how they spent them. Sources agree that the Alamo defenders had perhaps 2 weeks' worth of food in the garrison. It was unvaried, corn and beef, both brought into the Alamo in the panicked hours after the Mexican army was sighted on February 24th. Cornmeal could be made into a cold porridge called atole, or made into cornbread or corn tortillas. At the end of the day, whatever the final form, it was corn. 12 days of corn. 30 cattle, 150 to 250 people to feed. Supplies, meager to begin with, would have been running low by the night of March 5th. There is a further problem. Every stick of firewood for cooking had to be brought in from outside the walls. This meant more and more cold food for the garrison. Even if they had a supply of coffee, they wouldn't have been able to heat the water to drink it.
We did a scene where I was standing on a wall at the very beginning. You'll had to bring up some firewood. And while we were setting up that scene, I was standing out there and I was at the top of the wall and I was looking out and I was imagining what they would see, campfires at night, from the Mexican army, maybe some lights in the actual San Antonio proper, about a mile away or whatever. But I would imagine just kind of the terror of knowing what is out there and what's waiting for you.
There is a well in the Alamo, but it is running dry. For most of the siege, Texians have had to slip over the walls and fill water buckets from channels and streams flowing near the Alamo. In the last few days of the siege, Santa Anna's army has cut off the flow of water to the nearby irrigation channels, leaving the men to rely on the drying well. 32 men rode into the Alamo on March 1st, and as many as 60 more are now thought to have broken through the siege lines, heavily pursued by Mexican lancers. 92 additional Texians to fight for independence, but also 92 additional mouths to feed and water. For the Alamo's commander, a hungry and thirsty garrison only adds to his worries. It has driven him to make an extraordinary offer that he now must deeply regret.
From the moment of my arrival, I have been busy hostilizing the enemy in its position, so much so that they are not even allowed to raise their heads over the walls. Up to now, they still act stubborn, counting on the strong position by which they hold and hoping for much aid from their colonies and from the United States, but they will soon find out their mistake.
Miss Susanna, would you happen to have those clothes of mine washed? If I'm going to die tomorrow, I want to look my best.
Davy Crockett, former congressman from Tennessee, gone to Texas in search of a fresh start in a new land.
I think we'd do better to march out and die in the open air. I don't like to be hemmed up. I love the costume. I still laugh out loud when I think about wearing a coonskin hat for like 10 hours. Like, that was absolutely epic, totally out of my personality. But getting to wear the coonskin cap was so much fun. It was just like, I still just think like, that was me wearing a coonskin hat. So it was great. It was a lot of fun. I am told, gentlemen, that when a stranger like myself arrives among you, the first inquiry is, what brought you here? I think I would sum up Davy Crockett as an outdoorsman who just had that itch to be outside and to just be on the go. And so you think about the 13 days and you think about being stuck inside, that had to have been like super tough on him. I was for some years a member of Congress. In my last canvass, I told the people of my district that if they saw fit to re-elect me, I would serve them faithfully as I had done. But if not, they might all go to hell and I would go to Texas. Well, I was beaten and here I am.
Survivors will recall that Crockett was the animating spirit at the Alamo, keeping up the spirits of all around him as supplies ran low and hope dwindled.
Colonel Crockett was a performer on the violin, and often during the siege took it up and played his favorite tunes. So wearing the clothing, the women's clothing is just so different from what women wear nowadays, with the corset and the petticoat and the long skirt and the long sleeves. First thing going through my mind, even though this wasn't, the summer when this happened, all I could think about is wearing that in Texas most of the year and how awful that would be.
When asked about the uniform worn by the Texians, the quartermaster of the army said, "Rags. The uniform of our army was rags." Many of the Texians are wearing some version of what Crockett has worn for 12 days, a linen, cotton, or buckskin hunting shirt.
Initially hot and itchy. That was kind of one of the things I initially realized was just how, different the clothes feel. You're thinking like they're wearing this all the time. This is all they know.
Some of the Texians are wearing what might be considered the uniform of a gentleman in 1836, a tailcoat, waistcoat, and cravat. To modern eyes, they might as well have been walking the streets of London with characters out of Dickens. Colonel Travis was known as a bit of a clothes horse, with a flair for the colorful cravat or elegantly cut coat. What you won't see on this chilly night is a uniform. The only time he'd wear a uniform would be long after his death, in paintings and statues in his honor. At the very least, on this night, he is spared the freezing chill that has been all too common in the past weeks. 2 cold fronts have rolled in from the north in as many weeks. With little firewood to spare, the nights at the Alamo have been cold. Unbelievably, Santa Anna's army bore the brunt of the cold weather. While the dictator rode ahead in a covered coach on the road to San Antonio, the columns of his soldados were caught in a freak blizzard. Untold numbers froze to death on the trail. As is often the way in Texas, the weather changed on a dime. The temperatures probably hung around 60 degrees on the night of March 5th, warm enough to allow the Texians a little comfort as they fell into an exhausted slumber in the early morning hours of March 6th. One among the Texians feels a chill that has nothing to do with the weather. James Bowie, as famous for the knife he carries as he is for his adventures, a drunk, a fighter, a living contradiction, a former slave trader fighting against tyranny, dying of typhoid fever.
Colonel James Bowie was in the last stages of consumption. He was very sick and not expected to live.
Typhoid, pneumonia, consumption. All that can be known for sure is that Bowie was losing his last fight.
Under the flag of independence, we are ready to peril our lives 100 times a day and to drive away the monster who is fighting us under a blood-red flag.
Today, the flag of Texas flies over the Alamo. It was not the flag that would have flown there in 1836, but we should ask ourselves, what was? Knowing what flag was flying at the Alamo can help us discover what the 250 Texians inside the walls were willing to fight for. According to legend, this was the flag flying at the Alamo, meant to remind Santa Anna of the Constitution of 1824, which he had overthrown. But no contemporary sources actually ever saw this flag at the battle, and with the garrison all being avid supporters of Texas independence, it is unlikely they'd fly a flag symbolizing unity with Mexico. Multiple Mexican officials make specific mention of seeing just one flag at the Alamo, a Mexican tricolor with 2 golden stars. We don't know what the stars actually stood for, but we do know this flag was there.
This is one of the flags of the enemy's battalions captured today. The inspection of it will show plainly the true intentions of the treacherous colonists and of their abettors who came from parts of the United States of the North.
The New Orleans Greys had volunteered to fight for Texas independence. Evidence suggests that this flag was packed away during the siege, which still leaves a question. What flag were the Texians fighting for on March 6th? William Barrett Travis had spent $5 of his own money on a flag before leaving for San Antonio. The design of that flag has not been confirmed, but it is speculated to be similar to a design then popular amongst those pressing for independence and then American statehood. On March 4th, the Alamo was reinforced for the last time. From those reinforcements, Travis learns that the Mexican army has all but guaranteed no sizable group will be able to enter the fort. Water, firewood, and food dwindling, ammunition in short supply, the all but certain knowledge that no further help will appear on the horizon. With these facts weighing on his mind, the Alamo's commander makes a decision he will live, briefly, to regret.
A Mexican woman deserted us one night, and going over to the enemy informed them of our inferior number. She betrayed our situation about 2 days before the assault.
Susanna Dickinson is wrong. Juana Navarro Alsbury, a cousin to James Bowie, has not deserted the Alamo. Historians and Mexican eyewitness accounts suggest she was sent to Santa Anna with an offer from Travis to surrender the garrison so long as the lives of the Texians were spared. What Travis did not know was that Santa Anna had this very night held council with his officers about the timing of an assault on the Alamo. Many wished to wait for the arrival of larger cannon in order to batter down the weak Alamo walls and force a surrender. Surrender doesn't interest Santa Anna. He wants a great victory.
A siege of a few days would have caused a surrender, but it was not fit for the entire army should be detained before an irregular fortification hardly worthy of the name. Neither could its capture be dispensed with, for bad as it was well equipped with artillery, had a double wall and defenders who, it must be admitted, were very courageous. An assault would infuse our soldiers with that enthusiasm of the first triumph that would make them superior in the future to those of the enemy.
Santa Anna's refusal means more than a certain fight to the death without possibility of surrender. Travis must have realized that his offer has given away the weakness of the garrison. His enemy now knows, without a shadow of a doubt, that the Alamo is ripe for a fall. On March 5th, after sending James Allen with a final desperate plea for help, Travis comes to a decision. The Texians deserve to know what he knows.
I can't imagine how he felt going up to them, knowing that it was certain doom, but somehow, for himself included, but then now he's going to convince these other men to do it. So for me, at least, I feel like he must have felt dread.
The power of Santa Anna is to be met here or in the colonies. Best we meet them here than to
me,
suffer a war
when I
of
think about the
desolation.
Alamo story, and the part that just jumps out to me, it's when Travis kind of comes to the realization that like nobody's coming and we are going to die. Like that to me is, as a leader, I'm just like, that's such a heavy moment.
A blood-red banner hangs from the church of Behar. We should fight with desperation, with high-souled courage, which is characteristic of the patriot.
That's just this epic decision you have to make if you really want to, die for something or go into something knowing that there was not a positive outcome. I mean, you're going to die. There's probably what's going to happen. So I think crossing a line speaks to me the most.
Will you die for your country's liberty and for your own honor? I have accepted that fate which becomes me. Those who wish to go, let them go. Those who would stand by me, let them remain.
Either stay, you're fighting to the end, or leave and it's no problem. But that I'm prepared to die, I will not leave this place. The thing that is always captivating is, as Texans, we're willing to die. We will not surrender. This is ours.
On the evening previous to the massacre, Colonel Travis asked the command that if any desired to escape, now was the time, to let it be known, and to step out of the ranks.
Historians still argue over whether or not this moment ever happened. Historian J. Frank Dobie argued that it did not matter. It is cut into the bedrock of human emotions and heroical impulses, he said. Nobody forgets the line. It is drawn too deep and too straight.
Would I cross the line? Me personally, no. I'm thinking about my daughter. I'm thinking about I want to see her grow up. I think Almiron would have faced a very similar situation because his family was there. His little daughter was there, and I think that he had to have been thinking of ways to get out of there with them and make them safe. I think the reason why Almiron stands out is because of his family being there, for one. But I also think he's really part of that true Texas story of that time period. The idea of an individual who's going to leave the United States with his family, looking for a new start in Texas, gets involved in the revolution, is at the Battle of Gonzales, where it all began, and then volunteers to leave, basically his life that he had developed for himself as a blacksmith, and go to San Antonio, and defend that town, which to him probably had very little importance, but overall for Texas was extremely important. So I think for Almiron, he's this average American family man who's, fighting for what he believes in, all those, all ideals that we love in school, freedom and independence and that kind of thing.
The moment kind of lends itself to being dramatic and being kind of one of the climaxes of the whole event.
think he had to be thinking, like, why did I not just stay in Tennessee? Like, why am I here? I think there's a lot of emotion in the story of the Alamo. And I think when Travis stands up and says, listen, like, this is a lost cause. We are going to die, but our fighting is going to help us win this war. I think there's a lot of appeal to the emotional side of things. So I think that's why I stayed.
They knew that last night, they knew they probably weren't going to make it out. And they stuck around, they chose to stay there. And that really hits home for me.
The time has come to strike the decisive blow against our enemy at the fortress of the Alamo.
Santa Anna plans an attack from all four sides in the dawn darkness of March 6th. 2 columns will attack the northern wall, which is in ruins. 1 column will attack the low-walled cattle and horse pens to the east. A final column of Mexican sharpshooters, 100 of the best soldados Santa Anna has, will attempt to take the heavily fortified southern gate. The stage is set.
What are the lives of our soldiers and so many chickens? I tell you, the Alamo must fall, and my orders must be obeyed at all hazards. If our soldiers are driven back, the next line in their rear must force those before them forward and compel them to scale the walls, cost what it may. In this war, you know that there are no prisoners.
Anxious, there's a lot of just bring it on. Like, let's get this over with. I want to go ahead and fight this fight, because if I've already made the decision that I'm going to stand, I don't want to wait around on it.
I think on that last night, I think most of the Alamo defenders, they would have been looking out on that horizon, just hoping that at any point Sam Houston or Fannin is going to show up. I think, because hope springs eternal. I don't think that they thought that was their last night, or I don't think that they thought that they were going to die, or they were even going to have to fight. I think that they were thinking that they were just going to hold on one more night, one more day, one more, and then eventually help was going to arrive.
Colonel Travis, the Mexicans are coming!
On the morning of the 6th of March, about daylight, enemy threw up a signal rocket in advance. The Mexican horde came on like a whirlwind. Under the cover of darkness, they approached the fortifications and planted their scaling ladders against our walls. They climbed up to the top of our walls and jumped down within. As fast as their front ranks were slain, they were filled up again by fresh troops.
The scene offered by this engagement was extraordinary. 21 pieces of artillery used by the enemy with most perfect accuracy. The brisk fire of musketry could not check our dauntless soldiers.
Good God, Sue! The Mexicans are over the walls! Save our child.
A small piece on a high platform was wheeled by those who manned it.
it was silence when the last of its cannoneers fell under a shower of bullets.
The blood of noble men was seeping into the ground, and the bodies of heroes were lying cold in death.
The Alamo had fallen. They had died for a republic whose existence they never knew.
Among the corpses are those of Bowie and Travis, and also that of Crockett. The cause for which our soldiers fell renders their loss less painful, as it is the duty of the Mexican soldier to die for the defense of the rights of the nation, and all of us were ready for any sacrifice to promote this fond object. Nor will we, hereafter, suffer any foreigners, whatever their origin may be, to insult our country and to pollute its soils. Like, he didn't even dress up in his uniform on the night that the cannons were fired and the assault happened, right? And then that arrogance and that certainty you can see at the Battle of San Jacinto is ever present. Let's take a nap, and we lose essentially the war because of siesta, because we're so confident that what can they do to us?
There were those who emerged from the horror of that morning to tell their story. Among them, Susanna Dickinson and her child. Now, the Alamo lives in the twilight world between history and legend. The words and scenes you've seen enacted by these 9 Texas teachers were taken from the eyewitness accounts and primary sources of the time. Many more voices remain to be heard for those who are curious. Our story hopefully inspires you to seek out their stories, to cast even more light into the darkness.